All right, thanks, Lane, and welcome everybody. Again, I'm Mike Roderick with ITProTV, and that is probably the first time I've ever heard that. If I right-click on Mike, I'm not sure. But glad everybody's here. Excited to be talking about Windows Virtual Desktop. I don't know how interactive I can be with this because I was going to kind of get a feel for what your experience level was with Windows Virtual Desktop, or if anybody's actually played with the technology at all, and whether you've seen the Windows Virtual Desktop 2019 versus the Spring 2020 update. So if you have questions as I go through this, obviously just shout out, unmute yourself. But we're going to be working with, in this particular webinar, we're going to be taking a look at the newest version. It's the Spring 2020 update is what Microsoft is calling it for Windows Virtual Desktop. Windows Virtual Desktop, I believe everybody's familiar with this. This is their desktop as a service offering through Microsoft Azure. It was released generally available back around Ignite of 2019, so it was November or September, somewhere around there of 2019. And at that time, it was just Windows Virtual Desktop, and it worked really well. It was really, really impressive. It was the ability to provide our end users a full-blown Windows 10 desktop, or do just applications like we used to do with terminal services or remote app, if anybody's played with those technologies. But it was a lot easier. A whole lot easier, actually. And you could do it from any platform. There's a client for Windows, there's a client for Mac OS, there's a client for the Android devices. And honestly, you don't even need the client. You can use any HTML5 compatible browser and connect with their web client. So from an iPhone, from an Android phone, whatever the case may be, we can provide a full Windows 10 desktop or again, individual applications. So really cool technology. In the beginning, though, it was a little rough as far as the management side and the setup side went, because it was all done through PowerShell. There was a lot of commands that you had to run through, create your tenant, which is kind of like the outer container, almost like your Azure subscription would be. And then within that, you would create host pools, and the host pools were the collection of identical virtual machines that would be your session hosts. And this is what the users would connect to. And they'd be given access, like I said, either to the full desktop or a set of or a limited number of applications. Um, and once you got it set up through PowerShell, it wasn't too bad. And like I said, it was really easy for the users to connect to. But management-wise, there was no management interface at all. Towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, they started to release a GUI-based management portal that you could use for Windows Virtual Desktop. But it was in preview. It just made public preview. Like I said, I think towards the beginning of the year. And it was separate from the Azure portal. It was a separate page that you went to, a separate portal. And it gave you the ability to start creating tenants and host pools without using PowerShell. So a really good step in the right direction. And then I think it was last month, caught me off guard completely. They came out and they released Windows Virtual Desktop, and what they started doing was saying, all right, the one we're going to do right now, they're releasing right now, is going to be called the Windows Virtual Desktop Spring 2020 Update. And we're now going to refer to the old Windows Virtual Desktop as the Windows Virtual Desktop Fall Edition. So now we really have two different editions, if you will, of Windows Virtual Desktop. You got the Fall Edition, which went GA last year and is all done through PowerShell. And you now have the Spring 2020 update. And the Spring 2020 update is currently in preview. It's in public preview. It's not recommended for production environments, but I can't imagine it'll be very long before it is. And it's really slick. The big changes, and let's talk about what the difference is, why this big difference in naming conventions, things like that. The Spring 2020 update is ARM-based. So it's Azure Resource Manager object-based. And that makes a world of difference. What that means is I can do everything through the Azure portal. I can use ARM templates to deploy my environments. It gives me the ability to go into basically a form, an ARM template, fill in the values, click on create, and it uses the ARM objects and uses that template to deploy this environment, which gives me reusability, right? Because I can now take that template, I can export it, import it, run it again, duplicate. And it's so easy that, like I said, you're just basically filling in a form. I'll show you what I mean here in just a minute. So that's the biggest change is going to be that it's ARM based. And the side benefits of that are, as I said, everything is now done through the portal. I don't have to break out PowerShell at all if I don't want to. I still can. They have their Azure uh, um, modules that I can get. I'm sorry, the Azure, but they have the Windows Virtual Desktop modules that I can get for the Spring 2020 update for the ARM-based version of Windows Virtual Desktop. So I can still use PowerShell, I can still write my scripts, I can still try to automate things like that, but I don't have to. I can do it all through the portal. Second big thing, oh, and management wise, once it's deployed, I can now manage it through the portal. I can see what users are connected to what sessions. I can manage those virtual machines through there. I can create new application groups. I'll show you. I don't know if any of you have played with good old terminal services, remote desktop services, tried to use remote app, things like that. It was a time-consuming effort, and half the time you spent more time troubleshooting it and trying to provide performance. It was a nightmare. Um, with this, it's really easy, and like I said, you can manage it all through the portal. And they added support for Azure AD groups. This was something that was missing in the fall 2019 version. When you went to add a user, to give a user access to either the desktop or a remote app or whatever it was you were trying to do, you had to use individual UPNs. So if you had a little test environment of 5 users, no big deal. If you were trying to manage 100 or 1,000 users, it was not fun because you had to come up with a CSV file. You had to create a script that would loop through that and try to do this add-RDS user kind of thing. It was not easy. With the 2020 update, we can now use our Azure-based groups, which makes life, again, a whole lot easier. It's like old school Active Directory. I can manage my group membership. In fact, people that don't have access to the Windows Virtual Desktop management can still manage it. If they have access to it, they can manage the AD groups and change what access people have. So if I hire a new salesperson, I can dump them in the right groups in Azure Active Directory, and they'll get access to the right desktop or applications through Windows Virtual Desktop without changing any configuration on the WVD side of things. So it makes our life a whole lot easier. Excuse me. So that's a little history, if you will, the short, brief history it is of Windows Virtual Desktop, and a little comparison of what we had for the last 6 months or so, a year, to what we're getting now with the Spring 2020 update. Again, it's in public preview, so any of you, as long as you have a subscription, you can get out there and you can play with this. Well, I'm going to show you. It's pretty easy to work with. So I think you guys can see my screen now. Looks like it. I know it's a little bit small, a little bit blurry. I'm going to be zooming in whenever I can to give you a close-up view of what I'm doing. So hopefully you can see that when I zoom in. But currently I'm connected to portal.azure.com. And you would start, I've got a couple of things set up here. I've got a Windows Virtual Desktop environment already set up so we can have something to look at. And I also want to walk through the process of creating a Windows Virtual Desktop host pool so you can see that as well. But when you create a host pool, that's the virtual machines, the session hosts. It can take anywhere from 20 minutes longer depending on the VMs and the number of VMs you're creating, the size of those VMs, some other options. So I wanted to show you the process, but I also have the whole put the turkey in one oven, pull the turkey out of the other oven, so we can see the finished product and not have to chit chat for 20 minutes while we wait for our deployment to complete. All right, so I'm going to start by going over to the Windows Virtual Desktop console. Now I've got it pinned over here to my navigation tree. This is your first time playing with it. Obviously, you wouldn't find it there. So you'd go up to your search bar, and you're going to type in Windows Virtual Desktop. And you want to be careful with this right here. This is the first little gotcha. What you're going to see is there's actually two Windows Virtual Desktops. There's this one on the right that I just highlighted, and then there's the one over here on the left. Oops, and that is not a very good box there. Try that again. This one on the left, underneath Services. The one on the right, underneath Marketplace, that is the fall 2019. So that is the one that is non-ARM based. You'd be using PowerShell to set up your tenant first, and then you'd come into here and provision a host pool, and then you'd manage it all through PowerShell. So that's not the one you want, at least if you want to play with the new Spring 2020 update. The one on the left there, the Windows Virtual Desktop under Services, that is the ARM-based or the Spring 2020 update. So that's what we're going to click. And that's going to bring me to my Windows Virtual Desktop console or pane or whatever they want to call that these days. And this is kind of a one-stop shop for managing all the different components that make up our Windows Virtual Desktop. So what you'll see over here in my navigation tree is I actually have the ability to manage the main components of Windows Virtual Desktop, right? I've got the host pools, which are going to be the collection of VMs, right? I've got the application groups. This is where we're going to publish either the full desktop or individual applications. We got workspaces, and the workspaces are what the users connect to. When we create application groups, we're going to register those application groups into workspaces. And that's what the users are going to connect to from their web client or from their remote desktop application. Not the remote desktop application you're thinking of. It's a separate new thing from Microsoft that you can install on Windows, Mac, or Android. And then users really isn't I don't want to say it's not a part of Windows Virtual Desktop, but users is for managing sessions, right? I can go there and I can see what users are currently connected. I can disconnect them, things like that. So here we can do just about everything. And then right out here, I have the ability to create the host pool. This is from the overview pane, right? I can create that host pool there. I can also go to host pools. And from here, up at the top, I have the ability to click Add to create a new host pool here as well. So either way you go, it's going to start that same process for creating our host pool. And you'll see I have a couple created. We'll take a look at those in just a minute. What I want to do is go ahead and fire off the new wizard and walk you through the process and some of the options that you have to choose to set up your host pool. Then we'll just let that run in the background and we'll come back and we'll explore one of these existing host groups. So I'm going to jump back out to the overview because this is probably where you're going to start. And then you're going to click that blue button there that says create a host pool. All right, and as you can see, what happens is I get a template, right? I get a form that I can fill out. It's divided up into several tabs, if you will, across the top there. Basic, virtual machines, workspace, tags, review, and create. We're simply going to walk through each one of those and provide the information that it needs. Now let's take a look at what we've got down here, because I can't type and zoom at the same time. I want to talk about each one of these, and I'm going to have to zoom in and out if I want to hit some of these drop-down lists. The first one is just your subscription. Pretty straightforward, right? That's if you have more than one, hit the drop-down list, pick your subscription. Then you have your resource group where you're going to store all of these objects that you're creating. The host pool, that's going to be your session hosts, their network adapters, their hard drives, all of that. I would recommend creating a new host pool. Typically, we want to kind of store everything together for management purposes, for removal purposes, if this is a test. And then you're going to provide a unique name for the host pool. I started off using kind of weird names like dates because I create and tear these things down all the time. Lately, I've been trying to use more of a name that represents the virtual machines you'll find in that host pool. So other managers, other people working with this would understand, hey, this host pool is Windows 10 multi-user edition with Office 365 already installed. Or this is our custom virtual machine that has our line of business applications installed on it. So give it a descriptive name to describe the virtual machines that the host pool is going to contain. You have your location where you're going to store the metadata about your virtual machines and your host pool. And then down below here, you've got the host pool type. And this one is the one I want to zoom out real quick, hit my drop-down list and zoom back in. So you can see there's actually two options. I have personal, and then I also have pooled. All right. And the difference there, personal means you're going to assign a user a virtual machine. Each user would have their own virtual machine assigned to them. Pooled means I'm going to have multiple users per virtual machine. This is the big advantage of Windows Virtual Desktop. This is the only place that you can get access to Microsoft's Windows 10 multi-user edition, where I can have multiple concurrent users connected to the same client operating system. And this saves you money, right? Because I don't have to spin up, if I've got 100 users, I don't have to spin up 100 virtual machines. I can spin up 10 virtual machines and put 10 users on each one. Because what are my users doing? I mean, if I'm in a normal office environment, they're firing off emails, they're looking at spreadsheets, They're working with PowerPoint decks, or not too resource intensive tasks. This is where, and every situation is going to be different. You can have multiple host pools, some host pools dedicated to your heavy workloads, your developers, your CAD people, whatever the case may be. You can have other host pools that are smaller VMs that can support more users on lower resources. This is where you can play and tweak with it so that you can control your costs in the end, because that's what it's all about, right? The more users I stack on a single VM, the less cost I have, because I don't have to have the storage and the compute for each one of those VMs. And just as a side note, when you're working with Windows Virtual Desktop, that's all you're paying for, is your compute cycle. So when the machine's not being used, you're still paying for the storage for the disks, but you're just paying for compute cycles on those VMs. So it pays to start stacking users up if you can get the appropriate performance on that. All right. Now, depending on what you choose, if you choose personal, then you're going to choose how you're going to assign that. Maybe you have a pool of 10 virtual machines and 10 users, and it just takes the next available VM and assigns that user. Or you can do a direct run with this VM is specifically for this particular user. If you go with pooled, well, our choices are going to be a little different. Now we're going to have our max number of users and our load balancing algorithm. So max number of users is going to be how many users per virtual machine. What is the maximum number? No more than, say, 10 per VM, or no more than 5 per VM, right? And then your load balancing algorithm, I got to zoom out so I can hit this. You have the option for breadth first or depth first. If I have 5 VMs and I've set a maximum of 5 users per VM, with breadth first, it's going to split them across the VMs. So VM1 gets a user, second user that connects goes to VM2, 3, 4, 5. Sixth user that connects goes back to VM1. So it spreads the users evenly across the VMs as they connect. Depth first would stack them up on that first VM. I'm going to fill this VM up to the max number, 5 or whatever you set. Then I'm going to move on to second VM, stack them up there. So again, depending on how you want to work that, you can choose the different options there. All right, let me real quick fill in some values here. I got to make sure I use some unique names that I set up earlier. I'm going to do tag dash webinar for my host pool name. For my, oh, I'm sorry, actually for the resource group, let's do this. I'll show you what I filled out here in just a second. Tag webinar, trouble talking and typing at the same time. For my host pool name, let's call this tag dash win10. Should be good. For my max number of users, I'm going to do pooled max number of users 5, and I'll go breadth first. So there you can see I just filled out my appropriate information. And then I'm going to click next down here at the bottom and move on to the next tab, virtual machines. All right, so the virtual machines, this is where you're going to spend the most of the time, or this is where you have the most options to choose from. By default, it's actually set to no. And you're like, well, what do you mean? How are you going to spend a lot of time here? It looks pretty straightforward. No means you've already got your own VMs created, and you're going to later register those VMs into this host pool. So you've already created a custom VM or set of VMs that you're going to use. Leave this on no. You'd register the VMs afterwards. Most likely, you're going to be making your VMs now. So you choose yes, and now you can see all the options that we have to choose from as we create these VMs. And they're pretty, oops, let me zoom back out so I can get rid of that pop-up so we can see everything. There we go. So let's take a look at our choices here. Resource group. All right, so this is going to be, it defaults to the same resource group as you're creating the host pool in. Usually that's a good idea. If you're not, you can hit the drop-down list and change that, where you want to store the VMs. This is the one you really want to pay attention to, the VM size. It defaults to a D2S V3, which has 2 virtual CPUs and 8 gigabytes of memory. Again, this is where you can choose, right? If you're not happy with that size, you simply click change size. And that's going to take you out to the same thing you've seen before when you create VMs, where you can pick from the different flavors of virtual machines. You can filter that list. You can, if it doesn't show up on this list, you can actually go out and find other ones. Again, changing the filters will help you find other VMs. I typically, for my test environments, obviously I choose the one of the cheapest ones around, um, and just click select, and notice that changed over here. So now I'm doing a standard B2S. So again, depending on what you're trying to do, pick the appropriate VM size. Below that, how many VMs do you want to create? Right? You want to start off with 5 VMs, 2 VMs. Think about how many users you're going to have connecting and how you're going to spread those across there. The naming prefix, when we create these VMs, they are going to be joined to your Active Directory domain. So you need Windows Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, and this is going to be the prefix for those computer accounts. So whatever you put here, WVD, tag, whatever the case may be, it's going to add a dash and then a number. So -0, -1, -2. So whatever you want that to show up in Active Directory as. And then your image type for that virtual machine, you've got a choice of either gallery or storage blob. Gallery is going to let you pick from those pre-built virtual machines. Storage of Microsoft, you can go out to the gallery and pick a Windows 10 with Office already installed. Storage blob means you've already created a virtual hard drive, generalized it, stored it up in Azure Storage, and you'll have to provide the URI to access that virtual machine. Below that, we have, sorry for all the, I know I got to zoom in and out and make you guys dizzy out there. So we select our image. You've got your, oops, try that again. You got your hard drive type, standard or premium, solid state, or standard HDD. This is where you got to be careful too. These are important ones here. The machines, again, are going to be joined to your Active Directory domain. So you need to attach the machines to a network and a subnet that has access to your Active Directory. In my case, I've got a site-to-site VPN that runs back to my domain controller on premises. So I need to make sure I pick that one. If you're using Azure AD, you'd want to pick up the virtual network that has connection to Azure AD. Below that, public IP address. Windows Virtual Desktop does not require any public access. As far as we provide for the VMs. All that is handled through Azure routing. So the recommendation is no, don't give public IP addresses to these VMs. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up to security risks. You might have to in certain situations. You just need to make sure you're aware and take your normal precautions, your network security groups, etc. Speaking of network security groups, we've got our choice here. The choices for network security group are basic, none, and advanced. None means I'm not going to assign a network security group to these VMs on this subnet. Advanced means I already have a network security group created, and I'm going to pick that from a list. You would have to, again, create that ahead of time, and then it would show up in this list. Basic means I'm going to attach a network security group that you can pick and open certain ports on. Let me show you what I mean. Choose basic, and then if I change this to yes, I can now pick from a list of ports, and you can see it's pretty limited there on what I can choose from. So again, recommendation is no, not to worry about adding any public access or public ports, but you might have applications or certain needs that are going to require that access. Last part of the virtual machine creation is the specify domain or unit, right here, and the administrator account that we want to use. So this is an account that's going to join the machine to the domain. So I use a standard user account that I've delegated permission in Active Directory to join the machine to the domain. It's better than using, say, an administrator account. But either way, the username and the password for that account goes here. When these machines are joined to the domain, it is going to use the suffix of the UPN that you provide by default. So the domain the VMs are going to join would be, in this case, contoso.com. If you want to join this to a child domain or another domain, or specify a particular OU that the computer accounts are created in, you're going to choose this option, yes, and then you'll get the ability to type in a domain name as well as a distinguished name, a path for your OU. OU equals, domain component equals, you know what I'm talking about, hopefully. All right. All right, so let me go through here real quick and finish this off. We're going to leave it as the default, the same host pool. Already picked my VM size. To do this, make this a little bit quicker, I'm just going to choose one VM, and I'm going to call this tag for my prefix. I'm going to go to the gallery, and from the gallery, I don't think I showed you this. From if you leave it on gallery, you get to pick from one of these images. You can see Windows 10 multi-session. That's the multiple users. There's one with Office 365 already installed, and there's a data center edition. If you don't want one of those images, you can always click Browse, and you can go out to the marketplace and you can pick any one of those images or even ones that you've added to your own marketplace. I'm going to choose the Windows 10 Enterprise with the Office 365 installed. I'll leave it on standard HDD or SDD. I'm going to change my subnet to one that can connect to my domain controller. I'm leaving the basic security group. I'm not specifying the domain and my user account. Sorry, typing and talking has always been difficult for me. Hopefully I typed those passwords in correctly, otherwise this process will fail. And there you go. So I filled out that screen. Again, that's probably the most choices you've got to make. You'll see we're about done with our wizard at this point. So now we'll click Next. And this brings me to the workspace. This is one of the big changes from the 2019 version. In 2019, we called what the users would connect to was called a tenant, much like an Azure subscription. Now this is an ARM-based object within your Azure subscription, and they call it a workspace. So this is what hosts the application groups. This is what the users are going to connect to. When we set up this host pool, it's going to create a single application group for us by default. And that application group is going to be the desktop application group, and it's going to provide access to the full desktop. So whatever image we chose, it's going to create an application group that gives us access to the full desktop. If I choose to, I cannot register that application group here. I can leave it on no, but just understand that it will not work until you've registered it. A application group has to be registered to a workspace before it can be accessed, because the workspace is what the users connect to. They don't connect to the application group. They connect to the workspace. So it's easy enough to do it after the fact, but it's really easy to do it here as well. I'm simply going to choose yes until LastPass not to worry about that user account. And then if you've already created a workspace, you'll get a drop-down list. I do several demos with this technology, so I have a lot of resource group or workspaces already created. But you probably won't if it's your first time. So you'll simply click Create New, and you give it a name. I'll call this one Webinar. And we'll click OK. So you can just say, I'm just providing a name, right? Friendly name. Click OK, and it'll create that new workspace, and it will register, right? That default desktop application. Oops, that is not what I wanted. It'll register that default desktop application group with that new workspace that I just created. And that's really it. We click Next, and we'll see tags. And if you're familiar with Azure, you know tags. I can assign those to objects, simplify management, control access, billing purposes, things like that. But tags are completely optional. It doesn't affect the functionality of Windows Virtual Desktop at all. So I'm going to skip it. And then we're going to click Next, Review and Create. And now what it's doing is it's running this ARM template that we just created based on all that stuff we filled out. It's running it through a validation. And it's making sure that all required values have been provided and that there's no glaring issues with any of the values we provided, right? And what you should get is that green bar across the top saying validation passed. If you did not, if it gave you a red X, then you'd want to click on one of these tabs, work your way back, find the issue, and then fix it, and then come back. Down at the bottom, you also have the ability to download this template, so you can save this ARM template and start reusing it for different clients, customers, whatever the case may be. But that's it. We click Create, and that starts the process. Right? Now it's going to pop over here to a screen in a second where you can watch the deployment process if you want to, which I know we all get paid to sit here and watch the deployment, right? Yeah, no. Oh, wow. So I got an error, unlike API, bad request. All right, so that gave me an error. VM creation link template webinar not found. Interesting. Haven't seen that one before. Let's go back and see. because I've passed my validation. That's interesting. All right, well, unfortunately, I did something incorrect during that wizard, and I don't know what that was. I passed my validation, so I'm thinking this might be a networking glitch with me having Skype, Zoom, and a lot of other things going on here. Um, because it really it should have succeeded because I passed that validation. So rather than go through that again, I think you've seen the process, you've seen the information that you got to provide. Let's go ahead and take a look at a working host pool. So back out to my Windows Virtual Desktop console, I'm going to navigate over to Host Pools. And there I can see, so it started to create it. I'm kind of curious now to see what it was that went wrong. You can see that tag-win10. That is the host pool that we just tried to create. I can see it created the tag-webinar resource group. We go inside there though, there probably won't be much of anything. Says it created the application group. So it could have been my VM creation that gave me the issue. Yeah, there's no session host, so it did not create virtual machine. So something went wrong in the virtual machine creation. Tell you, it could have been I might have mistyped that password doing this quickly in a webinar. Good chance that I failed on that user account and password there. All right, but anyway, that won't slow us down. We're going to go ahead and look at one that was already created. So I've got another host pool here called Win10-0365, and you can see it is in the tag resource group, right, that I created earlier for this webinar. So let's go ahead and click on that. So had the deployment succeeded, you'd come back in here and you'd look at your host pool. And this is what you're going to get by default. You'll see that I've selected my host pool and I'm going to get information about the host pool out here. I can see it has one session host, and down there it has one application group, right? And one application. That's that default application group or the desktop application group that it creates by default. Right? Let's go ahead and take a look at the session hosts. So if you want to see the VMs, again, I chose to create one just to keep this really short. But there's the VM that it created. You can see the prefix and oh, you know what? If I use the same prefix, that might have been an issue as well. When I went to create that VM, I would have duplicated the name, and that probably caused a problem. That might have been my issue. And if I click on that VM, just like any other VM out there in Azure, I can manage it, right, just like any other VM. Let's go back out to our host pool. And as I said, it creates one application group by default. So I'm going to select application groups underneath manage. And up here at the top, what you'll see is that default application group or that desktop application group that it created. So this is the one that gives me full access to the Windows 10. In my case, I chose an image that has Windows 10 and Office 365. So it gives me access to that. But out of the box, you'll notice this users says 0, right over here. That's because I haven't assigned this to anybody yet. I haven't given anybody access to this workspace that contains this application group. So to do that, I'm going to click on the application group itself. And what you'll notice is the applications is grayed out right over here because this is the full desktop. So it's not individual applications, the full desktop. And what I need to do is click assignments. Oops. Click assignments right here to assign this to people, to users. So I'll click assignments. And then up at the top, I'm going to click add. And then your standard Azure browse, right? I can browse through Azure Active Directory. I can find a group. I created a couple groups for this demonstration. So I'm going to use that one that's called tag-full desktop. So I'll select the group, but you could select multiple groups if you needed to. Sales, marketing, whoever you're trying to give access to. Click select. Give it just a second. And now you see I have one assignment there, tag full desktop, right? So now we should check it out, right? Let's see what it looks like from the user's perspective. So I'm going to launch an in-private session here, in-private window. And I'm going to connect. Let me grab this URL to save me from typing. Where'd you go? There you are. All right, oops, and I wanted to zoom in before that changes. You'll see that rdweb.wvd.microsoft.com/arm/web client index.html. Prior in the 2019 version, you took out the word ARM, right? With the 2020 update, you add the word ARM in there and it connects to the newer version. I'm going to authenticate as that user. And so I already added a user in Active Directory to that tag full desktop group. Oops. Wonder I cannot type today. Keeping my system safe, right? Using that multi-factor authentication. And there we go. So I am connected as this user, Aubrey Spurgeon, right? I connected to that URL, the arm/web client/index.html. And what you'll see is the name of the workspace up there, tag in our case. And then right below that, I have the actual link for connecting to that desktop. So if she clicks on that, any resources that she begin access to, any other remote app groups, they're going to show up here. So we'll give this just a second, let this launch. So what it's doing is it's connecting me to one of those virtual machines residing in that session host or in that host pool. So I'm going to authenticate again as the user. Now, there's ways to set up SSO. They've been working on this. The reason we saw two different authentications here, one is to connect to Azure itself, to connect to this with this client. The second one was to actually connect to this desktop, so to connect to the virtual machine. Has to make sure she has a license assigned to her user account for Windows 10, Office 365 in this case, right? But there we go. I'm at the desktop. If I go to my Start menu, you'll see I have Office already installed. If you had a custom VM with your own line of business applications, it's all right there. And this is through a browser. So the platform is independent at this point. I could be on an iPad. I could be on my Mac. I could be on an Android device. I'm just using an HTML5 compatible browser, a capable browser, and I'm connecting to this web client. So super, super easy. Like I said, I apologize for the deployment of that host pool to failing, but it took, last one I spun up took about 20 minutes to spin it up. So if you've ever played with terminal services and tried to set that up, I challenge you to do it in an hour. Windows Virtual Desktop, you can have a full-blown VDI set up in under an hour and have access to Windows 10 VMs. It's really pretty neat. All right, so that is the full desktop. Now I'm going to go ahead and sign out from that user. All right, and I'm going to minimize her little in private window there, because the next thing I want to show you is creating the application groups. Because you might need to give access to a full Windows 10 desktop, but you also might want to provide access just to certain applications. They don't need a full desktop. When they're working remotely, when they're connecting from their iPad, I just want them to have this LOB or access to Word and Excel or whatever the case may be. So for that, you create what's called remote app groups. And these remote app groups, we publish applications within the remote app groups, and then we assign access to them the same way I did that desktop application group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back out to, just using my breadcrumb trail up here, back out to my host pool, where currently we only have the Windows, the full desktop, right? That default desktop application group. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add right up here at the top, and we're going to add a remote app group. All right, so very similar to when we deployed the host pool itself. You'll see this is ARM-based. We're going to walk through some choices here. It's a lot simpler. There's much fewer choices if we create this remote app group. All right. On this first tab, on the Basics tab, we've got our normal information we have to provide, subscription, resource group. Notice the host pool as well as the location are grayed out, and that's because where I started the wizard. I was inside the host pool when I clicked Add. If you think back to the console over there on the left navigation tree, I had host pools, application groups, workspaces, and users. If I go to application groups over there, I'm actually working with application groups across all host pools. So when you create a new application group, you'd have to specify which host pool you want to create the application group in. Because The host pool determines what applications are available to publish in the application group, right? The host pool are the VMs themselves. If the application isn't installed on those VMs, if Office isn't there, I can't very well publish Office, right? So the applications that we publish are based on the VMs that are inside that host pool. So specify the host pool and the location if necessary. Determine whether it's a remote app group or a remote app group, right? Zoom it is having fun with me today too. Boy, it's one of those days. Um, Notice desktop is grayed out. And there we go with the wrong one. Because you can only have one desktop application group per host pool. Wouldn't make sense to have more than one, right? You've given access to the full desktop. That's all there is to it. So only one desktop application group. So the only thing you can create here are remote app groups, and then give that remote app group a name. So let's real quick. I'm going to just call this one Office Basic. Something like that, right? This one you want to be descriptive of like what applications would be included in this group so other managers know what you're doing. We're going to go to assignments. And here's where I have to add my assignment. Who's going to have access to this remote app group? So I'm going to click that Add Azure AD Users. You could skip this and then add the assignment after the fact if you wanted to. I'm going to go to my tag. And I've got a group. I'm going to grab the sales users. I'm going to say they need access to the basic Office application. So I grab my Azure Active Directory group and I click Select. And you'll see that assignment is created there. Then I'll click Next. And this is where you choose what applications you want to publish into that application group. So I'm going to click Add Applications. And this is where the ARM-based object and deployment is so much easier. Working with PowerShell, you had to run a command to list all the applications. You had to get the app alias, you had to get the friendly name, the path to the executable, and you had to run additional commands to actually publish those, including that information, into these application groups. Here, it's a drop-down list. You can see the application source currently says Start Menu. You could also choose File Path. So if it was an application that wasn't on the Start Menu or wasn't showing up, you could give the path to the executable. I'm going to leave it on Start Menu. And all it's doing is scanning the virtual machine and giving me a list of all the applications that are available on that VM. So because I already have Office installed, you can see things like Publisher, Outlook, Excel, Word, and all the other default Windows 10 apps. If you had installed an application, a custom image, those applications would show up there as well. So let's do Excel, and I'll simply click Save. Give it just a second there. Try that again, save. And now it adds Excel to that list of applications that are part of this application group. I'm going to click, let's add a couple more. I'm going to click Add again, and let's do PowerPoint. And notice all the other information is already filled in, the path, the icon path, all of that. That's pretty handy. Click Save, and we'll do one more. We'll give them access to Word. All right. So now I've got 3 applications added to this application group. I'll click Next. And for the workspace, much like with that default desktop application group, you have to register this remote app group with a workspace before anybody can access it. So good idea to do it now, but you can always do it after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and choose Yes. And I'll get a list of existing workspaces. I'm going to choose Tag. You can see I just added that there. I'll click Next. And then tags are optional, so I'm going to skip those. Hopefully it will validate this time successfully and allow me to create it. So there we can see validation has passed. And I'll go ahead and click Create. And then barring any issues that I ran into last time, we should see that this succeeds. And it doesn't take very long at all. Should be just a matter of seconds before this pops up and says your deployment has completed. So it was that easy to create a remote app group, and we created an assignment, right? If I go back out to, you can see that it did complete. Right, so my deployment has completed. I'm going to go back out to Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm going to go back into my host pool. I'm going to go down to application groups. And there's my new application group that got created called Office Basic. If I click on Office Basic, I can work with this application group. So let's say I decided that I want to publish another application, or I wanted to take out PowerPoint. I don't want that to be part of it. I can simply come over here to Applications, and I can choose to add additional applications, or I could select one of the applications and choose Remove, right? So very, very easy to work with. Assignments are the same way. I created an assignment during the creation of the remote app group. But if I wanted to, let's say they came to me tomorrow, the boss says, hey, you know what? Marketing also needs access to those 3 applications. Come in here, add, browse Active Directory, find my group, add it, and I'm done, right? It's that easy. So let's see what that did to the end user's perspective. We go back out to that web client, and I'm just going to refresh. So this is that in private browsing session with Aubrey. Her user account is also part of tag sales users. And look at that. There is, oops, an arrow gets me every time. There's the applications that we just published as part of that remote app group. Now, I'll tell you that, when you see how quick that was, right? If you're manipulating the assignments underneath Windows Virtual Desktop, the results are almost instantaneous. You just come in here and refresh the page and you'll see the effect. If you're manipulating the group membership in Active Directory, like let's say I added a user to that tag sales users group, it's not quite as fast. It's not as slow as Active Directory on premises. You don't have to log off and log the user back on to update their access token or anything like that. But it does take a minute or 2 before they'll see the results in their portal if you change their group membership. Right, so just something to keep in mind. Another cool thing about these remote app groups, and how we're doing on time here, let me know if I'm getting short on time, is a user can belong to multiple remote app groups. And this is where the power comes in. Just like managing groups in Active Directory, I can have remote app groups that include Office Basic. I can have another remote app group that has my dev tools, or another app group that contains some other Office applications that not everybody needs access to, or Photoshop, whatever the case may be. And I can add these groups to the different remote app groups. So I can control what applications they have access to. So there's no more managing individual golden images based on users' requirements. Well, I need one image for sales because they need these applications. I need another image for marketing because they require these applications. I do it all from a single host pool, and I just create different remote app groups. And then I put the users in the appropriate remote app groups, and I'm good to go. Right? And you saw how easy that was. Let's say we want to decide that they need a publisher, right? Simply come out here, and I'll do this one a little quicker. I'm not going to stop and zoom in. I'm going to go and create a new application group. I'm going to put it in that same resource group. I'm going to give it a name of publisher. I'll click next, go to assignments, and I'm going to find my tag marketing group. And I'll click select. So I've added an assignment. I'll pick my application. Let's grab publisher. I'm going to move on. Very good. I'm going to move on to workspace and register that application with that same tag workspace. I'm going to skip tags, review and create. And we'll let that validate. Hopefully I didn't do that too fast. I didn't pick anything incorrectly. I'll click create. And it should create this remote app group. And it'll just take a second. And the other thing I want to do real quick is I'm going to remove her from there. It has finished. I'm going to go back out to my Windows Virtual Desktop. Go back into that same host pool. And go to my application groups. I'm going to grab that default application because if I'm giving her access to individual applications, I might not want her to have access to the full desktop, right? That's why I'm creating those application groups, is to limit what she can access. So let me remove the full desktop assignment. All right, so in a span of a minute or 2 there, we created a new application group, published an application to it, and removed her from the full desktop app. I'm going to jump over here to her client. I'm going to refresh. Azure, don't fail me now. All right, it looks like Publisher has appeared. The desktop is still there. That'll go away if I refresh another time. It should go away pretty quickly. And so there you have it. That is our a look at, it's still there. Again, it's a time thing. Just waiting for that to, oh, actually, you know what? It doesn't look like I actually removed it. There it goes. All right, so if I went back and refreshed it, it would eventually disappear and she'd no longer have access to that full desktop. So that's a look at the Windows Virtual Desktop, the Spring 2020 update, where we can do everything through the Azure portal. The only thing I really didn't show you was managing the sessions. Um, if I go back over here and make a quick connection to one of these applications. So here I'm connecting to Word instead of the full desktop. So she'll get Word inside her browser. And again, from any platform, iOS, um, Android. Now, Office might make me, if this is the first time she's connecting, you might have to log into Office, right, to make sure you have a valid license. I did this ahead of time, so hopefully it remembers. We'll see what happens. There we go. So she's connected into Word. Um, and there you go. Now, if I go back over to the portal and we go back out to Windows Virtual Desktop, I'm going to jump down to Users and I'll search for Aubrey. And here I can see sessions. And there is her current session connected to that Win10.0365. I can see that current state is active. You'll also see right up at top there, I have the ability to log off or disconnect or even send a message to that user. Maybe we're getting ready to drain that VM for updates or something like that. I can send a message out to them, let them know, hey, save your work. We're going to be dropping this VM or whatever the case may be. So there you have it. That is good old Windows Virtual Desktop 2020 Spring Update. Like I said in the beginning, it is still under public preview. It's not recommended for production environments, but I can't see it being very long before it is and completely replacing the fall 2019. The fall 2019 version is still available. You can still connect to it. You can still create tenants. My guess would be that will go away once the spring 2020 goes into general availability. But that's just me trying to look at my crystal ball and figure out what the heck Microsoft is doing. So who knows? All right, so hopefully that worked for you guys. And if you have any specific questions, I can try to, if I can hear you guys, just feel free to speak up. Good, good. Thanks, Dale. Appreciate that. Yeah. I thank you very much. It is definitely the spring 2020 update has brought it into the reach of a lot more people, I think. With the fall 2019 and using PowerShell for everything, it was a little rough around the edges. Um, but with this, with the whole managing it right through the portal, I think you'll find that you got to get the concepts down right. You have to get the idea, wrap the head around host pools and application groups and workspaces. But once you get that done, it's pretty straightforward. And there's always IT Pro TV. You're very welcome.